something that I notice, whether it's your performance videos or your different content that you have come to create, is in everything you do, you exude such a sense of joy and passion for everything. And it's funny because there's a video on YouTube that went viral several years ago, but it's still up there. So for our listeners, please go check it out. It's a video of you at 2 years old conducting Mahler 2, which it's so adorable, and but even at that young age, you had this sense of joy and passion for music. Can you talk a little bit about where that came from and how you were able to foster such love and joy at such a young age?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you for your extremely kind words and deep dive of some of those old videos. It's definitely kind of feels like the archives now, but um, it is something that I think about often where this joy and passion came from. And I have to say that it really comes from a very innate and organic place within my very soul and body. Um, I feel music is one of our most powerful languages as a human species, and there is a universality of how it can affect us as souls, really. And I think that's something I experienced very fortunately at a very young age through symphonic music primarily. I think that was my really first exposure to classical music, if you will. And I think the breadth and scope of what's available in symphonic repertoire uh, in terms of the instrumentation, the largeness and the grandeur of a large symphonic work has affected me from a very young age, and um, I think also I have to thank my parents for really encouraging me to be expressive in and not really uh, put any obstacles on that type of expression from me at a very young age, and encouraged me and nurtured and recognized that passion. And I'm sure there's some, if you want to be super uh, psychological about it, some sort of reaffirming cyclical nature that, seeing some sort of notion of expression and passion in me and having positive reinforcement allowed me to recognize that in myself, that that's something that's accepted and loved and nurtured and encouraged by external forces as well. So I have to really thank my parents for encouraging that. But uh, it ultimately comes from a very natural phenomenon of music and the effect it has on us as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really deep. And I mean, before we started recording, we were talking about the Dvorak Concerto, and I mean, I think a a big reason why that piece is so well loved and treasured, amongst many reasons, is um, it really, uh, as a listener, it kind of takes you on this journey, but it helps you reflect on different points in life, I think.
Absolutely.
Especially because this was obviously at a time in Dvorak's life where he was struggling, and he was obviously very homesick. So I
Hmm.
think a lot of different life values kind of come out of a piece like Dvorak, and obviously many other works. Obviously, the great Tchaikovsky symphonies and Beethoven symphonies. So, um, okay, yeah, no, that's great. I'm wondering. So, when did you come to the cello then? Was it soon
Hmm.
after you were introduced to symphonic works, or?
Yeah, I would say after a small stint in conducting at a young age, my parents were curious to see how that would manifest in a
Mhm.
more tangible manifestation of music, one could say.
Right.
And so I actually was really initially drawn to the double bass. And
Mhm.
there's a moment in Beethoven 5 where there's two long, I believe, quarter notes, dum bum, in the first movement of Beethoven 5. And I remember watching a video with the Berlin Philharmonic and Herbert von Karajan and seeing those instruments lined up in this very cinematic way,
Yeah.
and being extremely drawn to the sound, the visual
Right.
aspect of the double bass. And so I had let my parents know that I wanted to play the double bass at first, but they were very wise. I was a very small child, and I still am not the largest person on the planet. And so they said, we better take it down a notch, and we settled on the cello. And I remember actually, just to test this theory, my mother had brought me to a group violin class to see if this was just some little kid naivete, but I was very against the sound of the violin. So I apologize to all you violinists out there, but it's true that I think the cello sounds far better.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I know that you studied with the late great Irene Sharp out in the Bay Area. Can you talk a little bit about how she helped foster your love, more specifically to the cello?
Absolutely. Um, Irene Sharp was one of my very first mentors in cello, and she shaped so much of my knowledge of cello repertoire, also fostered the regularity of performing works on a scheduled basis, which I'll talk a little bit more about later.
Mhm.
But I think first and foremost, my impression of Irene Sharp was she was such a figurehead in the Bay Area growing up. She was the cello teacher,
Right.
and it was an immense honor to really study with her and work with her, and also get exposed to some wonderful cello playing by peers of mine in the Bay Area, as we all sort of went through this very structured style of teaching of hers where uh, every month we would have the studio class, and we were sort of expected to perform a new piece every month.
Mhm.
And that was just a regular thing. Um, and I am so appreciative of that because I think that uh, first of all, exposed me to a lot of repertoire, but also got us to this kind of schedule of getting a piece ready in what would be considered a fairly short amount of time, I think, by today's standard. I think now 1 month seems like no time at all to learn a new piece,
Mhm.
but just that speed of getting it to a very high level um, allowed me, I think, to I think in today's world, I would consider myself a pretty fast learner of music, and I have to attribute it to her probably because of that.
Mhm.
But she was an immense teacher, and I studied with her for over 13 years
Oh
growing up, which
wow.
is very unusual.
Mhm.
Um, I know typically you would change teachers much more frequently than that, but I think that's kind of the immense power that she had as a teacher, that she could really build you up really from ground zero to a very high level. So I miss her dearly, and she was one of my great mentors.
Yeah, that's really sweet.